gentlemen, I'm sorry, I have a very disappointing announcement for you. Mission Impossible is delayed with about a year. Actually, the sequel of Avatars, Avengers, and Spider-Man are also delayed for about a year, along with about 100 other movies and series, all because of artificial intelligence. On the 2nd of May, the Writers Guild of America went on strike to stand up against about 350 production companies and studios in Hollywood, because they were afraid that the production companies and studios would use AI to replace them. On July 14th, they were followed by SAG-AFTRA, which is the members' organization for the actors, sorry. In total, that's about 190,000 people on strike because they were afraid that artificial intelligence was going to take over their jobs. And a few other things that are typical in these strikes, but AI played a significant role. In total, this strike lasted for 191 days. The state of California lost about $5 billion in income. 700,000 people were out of work during these 191 days. But why am I talking about this? We need first to talk a little bit more about what artificial intelligence is and what it is not. Because since the launch of ChatGPT, the entire world has been talking about this hype about artificial general intelligence, singularity coming to take over the planet and make us all redundant. Or on the other hand, like all the consulting companies are trying to tell us, that it's going to solve all problems whatsoever and still probably make us redundant. We have been talking about big data for about 2 decades. How many here are old enough to have been involved in warehouse projects? Oh yeah, there are a few. You are old enough, right? Right. I can tell the rest of you that we, old enough to be part of this, spent a lot of money on these enormous warehouse projects. We didn't really reap the value, did we? Did we? So and so. What about you guys? Did you really reap the value of those warehouse projects? Yeah, reasonably, okay. Good for you. So over the last decade or so, we've been talking about digital transformation. There is not one company out there, not one board out there who has not talked about digital transformation over these last few years. Digital everything, almost. Now, we are at a stage where we have the data, we have the digital processes. Agreed? Right. Then it makes sense to apply mathematics and statistics to these large amounts of data to make sense out of them. Agreed? Yes. We call it artificial intelligence to confuse ourselves a bit. But it is really about mathematics. But what is really different now? Well, one of the most important things that are different is that we, the world, are producing 3.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. A quintillion is 10 to the power of 18. That would be a million, 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 or a billion, million, or a million, billion, whichever way you want to do it. A lot of zeros, 18 zeros to be precise, every day. We also have unprecedented processing capacity in the data centers around the world. And in addition to that, we have tools and methods and architecture to utilize these data and this processing power to apply the mathematical algorithms to these large amounts of data, including text, to develop AI models, to do a whole lot of interesting things. And then we launched ChatGPT in November, a bit more than a year ago. Now, the entire world of AI wasn't really that surprised that finally a company would launch a language model, because AI has been a topic since the 60s. But what was really, really surprising to almost everybody was that it was so good. Because ChatGPT proved to be extremely good at generating text in many languages. I wouldn't say all languages, but very many languages. So in this way, the launch of ChatGPT was in fact a paradigm shift. Because suddenly we had mathematical access to all this information buried down in the large amounts of texts. When I used to work in the insurance industry about a decade and a bit ago, the saying was that unless the data was structured, we couldn't use them for anything analytical. Now we know that that is no longer the truth. But at the same time, it's a strategic diversion. I talk to a lot of audiences across Europe, across industries, a lot of leaders, and I hear so many discussions that go along these lines. So, what is your strategy for using AI in your company? Oh, we're still wondering what to do about ChatGPT. That is the wrong discussion. And that is why I call it a strategic diversion. Because what we really need to talk about is not ChatGPT, but the language model below. Now, to help you understand what I'm trying to say here, how many of you are interested in cars? It's a car-producing area, right? Okay, so the chassis of the car is the part that you interact with, the part that you see. That is like the interaction layer of ChatGPT, the thing that you interact with, right? But how many of you buy cars based on the color of the car? Right, there's a few here, but the rest of the audience has realized that it's not about the chassis, it is about the engine, and it's the same thing with ChatGPT. It's not really about what you interact with, it's about the engine below. It's called GPT-4. GPT-4 has a lot of colleagues though. Some of them are open source and some are proprietary. Some are American, some are from the Middle East, called Jais or Baidu or Ernie from China. Many of them. It's the engine that is really interesting. But then, OpenAI is launching Sora, which is kind of a next frontier. It's not that surprising, but they are also now almost ready to launch their video generation tool. This is going to be interesting. But let's remember, whichever way we look at it, this is mathematics, not magic. Can you all repeat after me? All together. It is mathematics, it is not magic. Very good, just remember that. And in this mathematical toolbox, let's just call it a toolbox, we have three compartments. It's interpretation, prediction, and generation. And this is important to understand. That when I started working with numbers in an analytical format, like 25 years ago during my studies, we talked about interpretation and classification. And that's what we've been doing for the last decade, maybe a bit more. Interpret text, interpret images. What is in that image? Is it a cat or a dog? Remember that when Google was all over media? Wow, we can classify cats and dogs. Well, really impressive. Not anymore, right? And then we have prediction. And prediction, when we talk about numbers, could be things like predictive maintenance. Have you heard that expression before? Right? It's about predicting when does your equipment need maintenance, for example. Or it could be about predicting whether a fracture in an arm is whether it is a fracture, or it's not a fracture and you can go home and relax. And there are many, many examples of these prediction models, like recommendation engines on e-commerce sites. And then we have the generation part. And this is where ChatGPT comes in. This is where all the image creators come in. But what is extremely important to understand, and this is tricky for a lot of people, generation means it's extremely able to generate but it's not a truth machine. It's not a search engine, right? And we need to keep those two things apart, although in some contexts they are put together in the same bucket, but they're two very, very different things. So generation means that it's very, very, very good at coming up with stuff. Coming up with stuff. That's the key word here. So back to the engine of ChatGPT, or any of the others. It is about how can we use that engine to fuel our applications within the context of our corporations or companies. We can look at them as foundations, just like when we build a house, right? Whichever kind of building you construct, you will need some kind of foundation for your building. But the construction or the foundation is not the building, agreed? It's not going to keep you warm to just have a foundation. On top of that foundation, you need to build your building with the walls and the roof and everything of the interior. And it's the same way to think about these large language models. They are the foundations that you can build very interesting applications on top of, but you still need to build those applications on top of it. Now the ChatGPT, how many of you have actually tested it or something similar like Copilot? Right, almost everybody. If there are anybody here who has not still done that, you will have done by tomorrow. So that is like going to the public library. So using ChatGPT is like going to the public library. The public library can be a really interesting place. We have a library in Norway. How many of you have been to Oslo, by the way? I know there's at least one over there. Yeah, so a few more. Right? We have a really, really cool new library. It's an amazing place. It's the design, both inside and the external design, is really, really fascinating. It's a beautiful place. It's very creative, always full of people, from babies to retired people and everything in between, working, studying, relaxing, just having a coffee in the coffee bar, having lunch, browsing the bookshelves, gaming, 3D printing, sewing, a whole lot of things. Very creative place, very useful for me as an individual. However, I would never recommend any of the companies I work with to move their board meetings to the public library, right? I would also not recommend them to put all their business models into the shelves of the public library. You get my point? Right, so ChatGPT and its peers, useful on an individual level, but it's not relevant for companies. Companies need to think about how to build your own applications on top of those foundation models. And then there's another side of these large language models, and also combined with the other capabilities in our toolbox. Remember, interpretation, prediction, and generation. We need to keep this entire toolbox in our mind at all times. So now we have the next level of AI agents. You remember a few years ago, and the market was all wow, and in particular IBM. I worked a bit with them. Anybody from IBM here? I just have to ask before I make fun of you. Right. Remember these good old chatbots? Where you kind of had to tell the bot which question to ask, and then what kind of answers could you potentially get, and what would be the next questions. It's like a decision tree, remember? Do you think they were good? How many were really impressed with those? Oh, no arms. Where's the energy? Right. Oh, there's one. You're lying. Okay, so these good old bots, they were really daft. Rather useless, right? But now we have a next generation of AI agents, not just interaction agents like the next generation of, say, customer service bots, but also all other types of agents that can work with us across applications. And you can easily also build your own on the OpenAI marketplace. Some of these are good, some of these are going to be rather dangerous from a cybersecurity perspective, but never mind, there are going to be a lot of them. Actually, we were discussing last night over dinner, I would really like to have one in my car. When I'm driving, I'm thinking, it's the only time I sit still is in the car. I would love to have one of these agents to just do search online and find information for me, qualify it, discuss it with me, and when I'm happy to just make some notes. We are not very far away from doing that. That would be great. We're going to see so many of these. And then there's a domain, I would rather call it a big bucket of applications, that we call digital twins. Have heard that term? Yes, digital twins? Okay, so digital twin is a difficult word for what is really only a digital representation of something. It's a digital description of everything from a human, like you, to a building, an oil rig, a car, or it could be a decision process in a company. It doesn't have to be a thing, it can be a process. So a digital twin is simply a digital representation of something. The thing is, when we have these digital twins, we can apply mathematics in the form of artificial intelligence, remember, interpret, predict, generate, the entire toolbox. We can apply that to these digital representations to simulate, to predict, to make decisions. And in this space, the number of opportunities is, the sky is the limit. So let's talk about some of these. Let's start with Lily from McKinsey. I find it rather funny that they call a virtual agent a Lily based on the first female employee of the company. There's a bit of irony to that. Anyway, McKinsey has about 100,000 really good documents with insights from their client cases across 40 different databases, across about 70 countries, and about 100 years of business. Now imagine if you were a new analyst in McKinsey and you were asked to figure out something about the fish farming industry. How long would it take you to manually go through all those documents? A month? Maybe? But they have just applied a large language models. Actually, they are using GPT-4 on Azure, not ChatGPT, but the engine, GPT-4 on Azure with an API, like a drinking straw. And they built their own internal application to search through all those documents. And within seconds, they have synthesized whatever insight they need for various purposes, created drafts for new documents. This obviously saves time, and this is not unique for McKinsey. A lot of companies have enough information to do this. But another side, how many of you do any code writing? Should be quite a few, right? Good. Yeah. How many of you are using some kind of large language model to draft your code? I'm surprised that not more, actually. Now, those of you who do not use large language models, how many of you write all your code from scratch? Oh, there must be a couple of geeks here. A couple of over there. Right? But writing code from scratch, that's either for geeks, for academics, or those who are really, really, really interested in writing everything from scratch just because they like it. All the other developers, they look somewhere. Earlier days, they used Google search or GitHub. But now they use ChatGPT or its peers, as well as GitHub, Hugging Face, to find the code that you need, or at least to start drafting. Now, there's another interesting side to this. How many of you are old enough, again, to have written COBOL code? Yeah? Ladies and gentlemen, look, COBOL code. There are only 3 people in the room. They are worth their years in gold. Because you see, all the legacy systems in public services, banks, insurance companies, telcos, are, to a large extent, built on COBOL code and similar old-fashioned Stone Age code. How many of you volunteer to go through all that code, and you have to learn it first, and convert it to new code? Right, you see the business case? Okay, so one of the really obvious business cases here is that we can use these large language models to convert good old code to modern code, simply because we don't have enough people who know this good old code anymore. They're tired, at best case, and there are a few left. But it's also very useful for testing and for documentation. How many of you love writing documentation to your code? He's also worth his weight in gold because he said yes. Oh, there's another one. You should hire these two. These large language models are also very useful for doing just that because they don't really care about boring tasks. Okay, but let me talk about fish farming. I talked about digital twins. I'm Norwegian. Our annual revenue from seafood is about 13 billion euros. And salmon is a huge part of this. This is a really, really dirty industry. One would like to think that fish is healthy and sustainable. I wish. It's very, very dirty for several reasons. It's a lot of pollution from the fodder, because the fish don't eat all the fodder. It falls to the bottom of the sea, and then it pollutes the area. There's a lot of medication that has to be given to the fish, because there's so many fish in the same net. They get ill, you know? It's like stuffing a lot of people in a room and keeping them there for a year. You're not going to feel well after having done that. It's the same with the fish. It's not good for the fish to be that many fish in one net with that little space. So they have to medicate them. And then there's a lot of sludge, because these fish, they also have, you know. And all this pollutes the natural environment of our fjords. It's a huge disaster. And you see, to solve this, we humans need to control what's happening. Unfortunately, we are not born with fish eyes and fins, which means that we are really bad at doing anything below water. The solution to that is to use technology. So in these fish farms, there's a lot of hardware in the fish nets, merdene, and across the entire production value chain. There's cameras, there's sensor technology on the water quality, cameras on the fish, but also the environment, and also during the slaughter process, cameras and all kinds of quality monitoring, all the way to the supermarket. To be able to deal with the very unsustainable production, we need to think of this as a digital twin. To think about how can we collect data through the various parts of the value chain, and how can we use analytics to predict what is going to happen. Lice is a huge problem. How can we prevent lice attacks? Because that will increase the yield. You have a lot of agriculture in Romania. In agriculture, it's the very same situation. How can we use technology to improve the conditions in the agricultural productions, to increase the animal welfare, and to reduce the costs? And this is, to a very large extent, about prediction models, not generation. But even if I now talked a little bit about some of these maybe big headline cases, most cases of using AI are everyday use cases. How many of you opened your smartphones the moment you woke up this morning? Oh, be honest. Right? Facial recognition to open your smartphone? Yes, exactly. It's a bit of AI there. How many of you listen to music in the morning or on your way to work or school? Yeah? Right? Spotify? Huh? And then there's always a geek who's not using Spotify. Actually, I asked this question to an audience, and there's a competing, it's a T, sorry, I forgot the name, it's on T. What is the competitor to Spotify? T. Title, exactly, right. So there was a person in the audience. There's always a person in the audience using title. Where are you? Where are you? No?
Romania it's Deezer.
Huh?
In Romania it's Deezer.
Ah, right. So this audience, back to this audience. So I asked about Spotify, and there's of course this geek in the corner saying, no, title! And then I get a text message after my keynote from a friend of mine, not friend, an acquaintance I'd say. And he said, I heard you were speaking and asking about title. You know I made it, right? Okay, so back to the everyday use cases. Point is that you meet AI bits and pieces in many applications every day. You just don't think about it. It's just there. Spotify is full of AI. It's a recommendation engine. Amazon, all e-commerce sites, public transportation applications, credit card fraud detection. We're going to see more of this, and it's just going to be natural parts of our lives. Bits and pieces. We just get used to it. You will also get used to using these generative tools, both on personal level and on business level. But when we all start using these tools, there's a problem called bias. How many of you have seen the headlines about Google Gemini and the rather funny incident of Gemini? How many have seen it? So there's a few. All right, so I have to explain the case to the rest. So Google has been kind of tagging along in the AI race. They've been a bit behind. So they made a mess out of the Bard demo about a year ago, and it was a human mistake because it was the marketing department who didn't actually do their job properly. And then Google was beaten by the media because they didn't fulfill expectations. It doesn't mean that Bard wasn't a good generator when it comes to text. It was just that the market expected it to be a truth finder. And for those of you who understand how this technology works, you know that that was never going to happen, right? And now they launched Gemini, a competitor to DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, so an image generator. One of the big problems of these image generators, which they have received a lot of backlash for over the last year, is that they are full of bias. And simply put, if you go to Google and search for an image of a CEO, what do you get? You get an image of a white man in suit, right? Okay, so the big problem of these image generators is that they train on the data that they find, and then they replicate that, right? So if there are a lot of white men in the images, they're going to replicate images with white men, obviously. That's been a huge issue. We can talk a lot about that, but let's move on to Gemini. So Google has been working on this to try to solve this problem, and they succeeded a bit too well. Because what happened was that when they launched Gemini and somebody started searching for an image of a German in a Nazi uniform, what did they get? An Asian woman. I don't know how many Asian women were in the Second World War on the German side. And another example was that they asked for an image of a Viking. I'm Norwegian, so I found this really funny. What did they get? They got an American native. But what the Americans have really, really been insulted by, and they call Google woke because of this, was that when they asked for images of the founding fathers, they got black men with white wigs. And then the world claims that Google is woke. I'd say Google has actually done their job on trying to mitigate the bias. The problematic part is that we, the humans, don't really understand how this works. So I'll explain it in simple terms. When we feed algorithms data to train on, we feed them with the world as it was, both in images and in text. When we ask these generators to generate outputs, we expect them to generate output for the world we want to have. You see the gap? And then people get all fussed up about the size of this gap. That's what I call human stupidity. We need to understand that when we train these algorithms on the world as it was, we are in fact, as humans, standing in front of a huge mirror, and what we see is our own very human behavior, with our own attitudes, prejudices, not so nice characteristics. There's a lot of good things, yes, yeah, humans are rather good at many things. But you remember, or even just from reading about the Stone Age, humans have never really liked those who are different. We want to take care of our own first. We're rather egoistic. If we can get power, we will grasp it. All that human behavior is buried down into those data that we use as training data for the algorithms, and we expect the algorithms to be better than us humans. Right, problem. Okay, this is a huge problem. It's not going to be simple to solve. But we all need to realize that when we meet and face these problems, we need to look into that mirror. And another thing which is related to that is, what does the world know about you? How many digital twins have you left out there? We tend to think about companies like Google or Amazon or Facebook or Meta when we talk about who knows what about us. But you all just revealed that many of you are using Spotify. Spotify knows a lot. And not just that, they also have a patent to use your microphones to analyze your surroundings, your voice, your emotions, combined with everything they know about your emotional state, because music is so tightly connected to our emotions. Spotify knows a lot about you. And not just that, they also have a huge marketing platform to promote podcasts. And what do we get? With the wrong leaders at the top, a massive propaganda machine. And to take that even a little bit further, 49% of the world's population are electing their leaders this year. Imagine if you can control people's feelings and then promote political messages, just like Spotify can. But we need to move beyond Spotify. We use social media, we read news, we watch news, and with the current state of AI, and in particular degenerative AI, fake news is a huge problem and is going to have significant impact on these elections. There are more than 50 elections around the world. It's going to be a rather dramatic year, I think. What can we do? Well, first of all, what we need to do is all to become more critical. We need to understand that the human strength in this is our ability to be critical, to check several sources, and not just rely on what we are served. Unfortunately, most people do not exercise that strength. And then is the threat of cyber attacks. Because of this development of, in particular, generative AI, deep fakes are easily created. Anybody can do it, which means that anybody can be fooled. All of you can be fooled. Most of you will be fooled as well. Nicolai Tangen is the CEO of Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. He has one of the largest buckets of money in the world. He's the one taking care of my pension, so I rather think that he is paranoid about cybersecurity. But when he started his job about 2.5 years ago, he received an email from a journalist he knew. It was about his summer vacation, his cabin, like social friendly questions. And so Tang Yin answered these questions. And any leaders here who have received PR training? No? Okay, so as a leader, like a top executive, you are very often drilled in how to deal with media, right? And Nikolai Tang Yin is no exception. He was drilled in what to do when a journalist wants to have an interview. You always check what is written before you say yes to publish, right? And he did too. So he asked to get the text back to verify what was written about him. And so he got the email with a link saying, click here to check. He was lucky because it was his own security department who tested him. When one of the most paranoid leaders in the world was fooled by a simple thing like that, all of you can be too. And it can be bloody expensive for you. And let's not forget that 80% of cyber attacks in companies come from their vendors. Jailbreaking is an obvious problem with these large language models simply because it's impossible to put fixed guardrails just because of the way they work. So you can work around them and make them do really weird stuff. What is really scary from a cybersecurity perspective, and those who are interested will find articles about this on Archive, is you can hide prompts that can cause damage deep into these models. And these prompts are only triggered by certain words and phrases at a certain point in time, which means that it can work fine for a long time, and then suddenly there's one trigger that releases an action you don't want. Scamming and phishing on steroids means really just deep fakes, and it's easy to do. But then we also need to keep in mind that the pollution of data is really, really harmful. And in this landscape where we have connection between images and text, and these are connected, if you get pollution into any of those models, it's almost impossible to remove. You have to start from scratch. So this is going to be expensive. But now, we also hear that AI is the solution to all our environmental problems. And we don't hear that much about AI being a part of these environmental problems because those who know have a huge incentive to keep it quiet. Let's start with a simple thing as the amount of power required to train these large engines. GPT-3 released information that indicates that to train GPT-3 once would require as much energy as 130 households for a year. GPT-4, they've kept it secret. I have not been able to find any number. That might sound a lot, but actually, what is much more scary is the following. The number of prompts sent to GPT-4 and its peers every day is in the hundreds of millions. Every prompt requires 4 to 5 times as much energy as a good old-fashioned Google search. Which means that every day, these large language models require as much energy as somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 households every day. In Norway, we recently, well, actually almost a year ago now, an interesting case that became a political debate. So, there's a Norwegian company called Nammo. They are a very large ammunition producer, and they produce a lot of the ammunition that is sent to Ukraine. In the same area, Green Mountain, as a data center owner, are building a data center for TikTok. Unfortunately, these two are in the same area. So at this point, Nammo was told, sorry, you cannot expand your production because we need to build a data center for TikTok. The societal implication of that was that we had to choose between kitten videos and ammunition to defend Ukraine, which is kind of unthinkable, right? But that is the political reality. In this case, they solved it, but it's just an example of many of the societal and political discussions we are going to see moving forward. Google is also building one of the largest new data centers in Norway. It's going to require at least 130 windmills when they are on full steam. It's just the problem is that windmills are unstable, so they will also need good old regular hydropower, which is what we typically have in Norway. But they're in an area where there's not enough power for all the other industries in the same area. So who will we feed? Google or manufacturing companies? That discussion is coming. Meta tried to build a data center in Zeeland in the Netherlands. Again, the local population said, no, we are not willing to leave or give you 1,400 hectares of land, which is going to require as much electricity as a city of 460,000 people. Sorry, go somewhere else. So Meta went to Spain, to Talavera de la Reina, southwest of Madrid, in one of the driest areas of Europe, and this was last summer. And at this time, 80 to 90% of the agricultural production is in this area, died because of the drought. It's just that these data centers require a lot of water. A lot of water in one of the driest regions in Europe. And to add to the very unsustainable business of digital, these things become waste, very toxic waste. Last year, the world produced 61.3 million tons of electronic waste. Last summer, USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, visited Oslo. USS Gerald R. Ford weighs about 91,000 metric tons when it is fully loaded with personnel, equipment, airplanes, and is a nuclear-driven vessel, so that also weighs a bit. 61.3 million metric tons of waste equals 660 Gerald R. Fords of waste in 1 year. We have children around today. You know, the easiest way of getting the gold out of these data chips and the electronics of these things and your smartphones and your computers? Child labor. So those of you who believe the lies about AI removing all the need for child labor, now you know it's a lie. 18 million children, 13 million women are in immediate health risk because of working in these waste dumps, many of them in Africa, because of our electronic needs. Okay, so let's move on from this depression. But it is important, when we talk about digital transformation, when we talk about the use of AI, we need to have a balanced perspective. We cannot just believe that it's going to solve all problems. First of all, it's not going to solve all problems, but it's also going to bring us a whole lot of new problems. So we need to be able to think about both opportunities and risks at the same time. I find this image quite funny, that, you know, ostriches don't actually put their head in the sand. But I still think it's a good reminder that when we talk about digital, we cannot be like that ostrich, to put our head in the sand and just hope that all these problems will go away, because they will not. And it's our responsibility to design the future of technology to be human more, not human less. I also often get a question, so what about my job? Is it going to disappear? Many of you come just out of school. Are your jobs going to be so different that your education no longer matters? That's a very good question. I think, personally, that all these numbers talking about how AI is going to take over all jobs, and a lot of jobs, these numbers are blown up to dimensions that are not credible at all. But what we do know is that a lot of jobs are going to change. And people will lose their jobs, first and foremost, because they're going to lose their jobs to somebody who's actually able to use those tools. So I'd rather see this as an encouragement for all of you to actually learn enough about what AI is about, and it is mathematics, it's not magic. Agreed? Okay, so learn enough about how they actually work, not based on the hype, but how they actually work, so that you can complement your skills, enhance your skills, and be part of the necessary discussions. There is also a coming AI Act from the European Union, which has as main purpose to protect the rights of the individual. It's about, first of all, what kind of data are we giving up for various purposes? How are those data used for us and against us? That's the most important part. But of course, it's also about enhancing European businesses. It's going to be problematic. It's going to be a lot of headache. But I do think that those who are actually leaning forward and starting to prepare for this coming AI Act will win the game. Because the Act is coming. It's not going away. But what do we do until then? That's a big question, right? Because it still takes a bit of time before it's in full force. But the reality is that we already have quite a bit of legislation that does work on the domain of AI too. We just need to think a little bit. And we need to understand that it is mathematics, not magic. And when we understand that, we can apply existing laws to many of the problems we currently face. So, to go back to where I started, why is this strike in Hollywood relevant to you? It's because this is the first strike we have seen where humans raise up and say, hold your horses. We are not sure we want these changes that come with the technology. A lot of this is based on fear because they don't really quite understand how these technologies work. But many of these reactions are based on real changes, because obviously those 350 production companies and studios, they do want to use technology to replace humans, to reduce costs, and to speed up time to market. This is going to happen, the strikes I mean, in many industries. This is just a first example. So, to summarize, AI is the natural next step of big data, digital transformation, applying mathematics to these data and these processes. It's not going to go away like metaverse did. This is not going to go away. And it is mathematics, not magic. You will remember this for all eternity. And finally, it is a toolbox. And at home, I have a very physical toolbox. There's a hammer in that toolbox. Now, I can use that hammer to kill the neighbor's cat, do a lot of damage, or I can use that hammer to do something useful at home. The AI toolbox is the same. It's up to you. Do you want to become the victims or the masters of this toolbox? And I just want to leave you with one final statement. There's an African saying that goes like this: it takes a village to raise a child. And my addition to that is that it's going to take a world to train AI. Thank you.